Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome, and congratulations, Karl Ove.
Thank you very much.
It is my huge pleasure to be here. Before I start, phones off, I guess, everybody. This event is being live streamed on the BBC Arts Online. It also will cut down to a half-hour television interview, which will go out on BBC World News and also on the News Channel. And you can access it via bbc.com if you've got friends who live abroad and are interested, and here in this country, bbc.co.uk. This is the first year of the BBC's partnership with the Hay Festival, and we are delighted to be here. And it's also my huge pleasure, because I have enjoyed so much reading the first 3 of your 6-part enormous endeavour. I wonder, let me just start by telling people who don't know very much about it, with a little introduction. Is it a novel, or is it a memoir, or is it something in between? Karl Ove is somewhat of a literary sensation in his native Norway. He's written a 3,600-page memoir, I'm calling it, called Min Kampf in Norwegian, Mein Kampf in German, My Struggle in English. The books have made him famous and infamous in Norway, and it's reckoned that 1/5 of the population of his country has read the book. And I think they had a law in Norway, perhaps not a law, perhaps a directive, to prevent people at work talking about the book. So utterly compelled was the population of Norway. Not least because of the title, it's been controversial, but also the books are, if they are indeed a memoir, almost a total recall of his life. He's 45 years old, the life of identifiable members of his family also, and it is, for my part at least, ceaselessly compelling. Welcome to Hay, Karl Ove. Let me start by asking you about the distinction between the memoir and the novel. The first three, in English at least, are marketed as a novel.
Yeah.
Is it a novel or is it a memoir?
For me, it was a novel. And it is that because I use all the tools of a novel. And it's not an autobiography for me, because I'm not interested in, representing my life. I'm not interested in telling stories from my life. That's not the point of it. This is much more kind of using my life as a raw material, and I'm searching for something in my life. I'm searching for, I want to understand the times I'm living in myself, and it's also kind of an existential search. And I think it didn't start out as such a big, huge project. It started out as something very, very small, me sitting alone in my room trying to write a novel about my father, and failing and failing and failing and failing.
Having written 2 novels that were fairly conventional and had done quite well.
Yeah, that's right. And then all of a sudden, I just, was so frustrated, and I needed a way into this. So I just, basically said, fuck convention, fuck literature, and just try to say it as it is. As simple and easy as it is.
So I'm going to ask you not to swear because it's being live streamed.
I'm sorry.
I'm enjoying it, but I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay. I won't.
Thank you. So the frustration over writing a novel about your father, or even wanting to write a novel about your father, came from what impulse? Because you hadn't written about anything that came even close to an autobiographical book in your first 2 books, really. They were completely different. So just explain why writing about your father was something that you wanted to do.
When I wrote my first novel, and it was going to be published in 1998, and was almost ready for publication, then my father died. And I realized I have written this novel to him. I didn't know it when I wrote it, but that was what it was, really. And then he died, and he was died as an alcoholic. It's a very terrible place where he died, and we went down there and found the house where he grew up. Kind of looked like a place for junkies, and it was total miserable everything. And I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't identify with this. It was a kind of a puzzle or an enigma for me. Why did he do it? I mean, I think he wanted to die, basically. How come? And then I become in my 40s myself, and I could identify with him. I think I had a kind of related frustration. I felt alienated, felt like I led another man's life, And for the first time in my life, I could identify with him, realizing he was a human being. He was just like me, to be,
Was that when you had become a father yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And then that is a starting point for the novel. And it's also, this is the story of my life. And I think everybody has one story in their life, And I really wanted to tell it. And he's been dead for, like 7-8 years. And I think this is the time to do it. But I couldn't. How? I didn't have, didn't find a way into it. And then I started to write about myself. I revealed some secrets I have never told anyone. It's about betrayal. It's about doing things you shouldn't, And I sent it to my editor, and he called it, this is like a manic confession, And I think it was shocked, but there was an enormous energy in it. And I think that's because I'm, I try to please people, I try to be kind, I want to be good, and I always wanted to please my father, That was one of the key things in my life. And now I just, ripped all that aside, and I was doing something completely different.
In the first book, the first 20, 30 pages are an absolute tour de force rumination on death. And it's possible that opening is the reason why, as well as what happens in the rest of the 3 books, you've been compared to Proust. Because although you try and tell a story that has a sort of linear narrative, you are very discursive, you digress, you go off, you talk about your feelings about nature, you are remembering a painting and what it felt like to stand in front of a Turner in the National Gallery, a Constable. All of these digressions and these ruminations suggest that this is not just a memoir, but this is an endeavor that is designed to help not just you understand the world, but for us as readers to understand ourselves. And I wondered when you started to do that, whether that was something that you thought might be the result.
No, not at all, no. Because this is, one of the things that is necessary to write is that all those, self-criticism or the notion of someone reading it, or the notion of this is going to be important for someone, you have to get rid of that. Because then you are, then you're doing something like not pretending, but this kind of...
It's too self-conscious.
Yes, it is. And you have to free yourself from that. And that's the problem with writing. I think myself, this writing is kind of banal, and it's naive, and it's, it's all kind of things. And if I had this notion of this being important for someone else, I would have tried to be clever. I would try, and I would try to write a proper novel, right? But this is important because you have to get into a kind of, to be free, And there's almost no communication in that. I mean, don't write this for anyone, really. Not even for myself, I think. And it's...
So it wasn't writing as therapy? There was no cathartic notion in your mind?
No. It's about the opposite. The writing process is about, selflessness. It's about, if you read, if you read a very good book, you disappear for yourself, and that feeling, reading Dostoevsky, it's like it's a fire inside of you. You don't know why, because there's no thought involved. It's just feelings and emotions. And the second I realized writing is like reading, then I became a writer. I was 27, 28 years old, and I remember it very clearly. I wrote something unexpected. it didn't come, from my thoughts or anything. And where did it come from? From experience of reading, watching films, all the cultural things that are inside of us. That's not my property. And if you manage to free yourself from the thought of, no, I'm going to make something, these things just come pouring in on the page. And it's really strange because it should be about me, but in the end it isn't.
But even if you didn't want it to be, it inadvertently becomes about the readers too.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. I was so amazed when that happened, that people relate to it, because I thought honestly that even my friend wouldn't be interested in this book. And then people start to connect to it, start to identify with it, and contacted me and all kinds of people. I mean, there's a woman that's 90 years old that wrote me a letter, and there's people from prison, from everywhere who is connected to this. And the point is, they don't talk about literature. Literature is not their agenda, and I'm not their agenda. They want to talk about their lives, and.
So you contend that this is a novel. The protagonist in all the books is Karl Ove. The people are not disguised in any way. Your wife, Linda, your second wife, Linda, is in the book. Your first wife, Tonya, who you betray, is in the book. Your father is in the book. Your mother is in the book. Your brother is in the book. Your father's brother is in the book. Your grandmother is in the book. All of these people are named. So if it's not a memoir, what is your responsibility to these people? What went through your head in terms of the ethics of the project, the endeavor, as against the feelings of the people who, for the most part, presumably, loved you and you loved them?
When I started to write it, I didn't think of the consequences. I didn't think of this really as being published in the end. And I have a kind of an autistic part of me, that makes it possible to do this thing without thinking of the consequences. So I wrote the first novel. But I am decent, and I realized, okay, they have to read it, those people I've written about. So I sent the manuscript out to everybody involved, And then I got the reactions back, and then kind of all hell broke loose for me, because I understood what I've been doing, I realized it. And it was an extremely difficult, it was like hell, and it was a moral dilemma I couldn't, find a solution to. Because what I'm basically saying to those people is that my book is more important than your life. And you can't say that. I mean, that's impossible to say.
But
so
it was a choice that you made, and twice
yeah.
you said, I'm a good person, I'm a decent person.
Yeah.
So setting that against the choice that you did make, even if you didn't set out to have the book published, the decision in the end to have it published was presumably yours and yours alone.
Yeah,
so how do you explain the tension between those two things?
It was a struggle for me, and I was, when it was a crisis, and I was discussing with all my friends and editor, and I think in the end, the solution for me was to turn it around, because the controversy was about my father revealing his story. But I turned it around and thought, who can say that I can't write about my father? I mean, who owns the story to my father? And when I thought of that, I thought, okay, but he is my father, and I have the right to tell this story. But there was a lot of other people around, and I changed something, took something out, and I tried to, manage this thing. But if I had, given in all over, then it wouldn't have been any book. And what I'm thinking in the end, and that's difficult because I'm the one who defend myself and I'm writing this, but in the end, I think this isn't dangerous. It could be risky, but it isn't dangerous. And I have a good relation with almost everybody in the book. except basically from my father's family. And I totally understand why they don't want to have anything to do with me.
For those who, I don't think it's a spoiler to explain just the outlines of the first book and how it relates to the third book. Because in the first book, it's not entirely clear why your relationship with your father is difficult. He's clearly distant, and he's a hard taskmaster, that's absolutely clear. But it's not entirely clear how he treated you that might make you feel very unhappy in your relationship with him. The second half of the first book, A Death in the Family, is how it's translated in English. It's called My Struggle, but it's called A Death in the Family. So we know immediately you are going to be talking about the death of your father. Is just the most raw, exposing tract on what it means to be a son, because you discover how your father lived in the last 10 years of his life. He became an alcoholic, living with his own mother, and the house that you went to clean after his death was full of urine-soaked sofas, excrement, piles of clothes rotting, bottles of alcohol everywhere, and your grandmother also was complicit in this. The rawness of this story and your description of it, I can understand exactly why your father's brother would not be happy with it. But this idea of owning a story, I think is a really interesting one for a writer, a novelist.
Yeah.
Why is it so important for you to feel that this is yours and nobody else's to tell? Because you give other perspectives too, or you attempt to.
Yeah. No, I mean, everybody could tell whatever they like. I mean, but they can't say no to my story. That's what I'm meaning. They can't say you are not, you know, in no position to write this, you know. But what I did was saying, not only you shouldn't tell this, but I said this isn't true. It didn't happen this way, you know. And I started, you know, to recollect and think, did it really happen, or did I exaggerate? Did I make it more dramatic for, you know, the purpose of the book? And maybe I did, I thought, and I called my brother, and he said, I'm not sure, because we were both shocked, you know, and he was there, but and it was a terrible moment for me, because I have, you know, said that this book is the truth. That's what it is about. I'm telling about my own life, and I started to doubt it all. I mean, I certainly used the story of my father to become more, you know, interesting myself before I wrote the book, but it's something you can do and feel very bad about afterwards. But I did that, you know. I'm interesting my father, this happened to him, and, you know. But then I got a letter from one of the medical team that was there, and saying, I've just sat down, started to read a book, there's a house, and I remember I was there. And so that person was in the house when my father died, and she said that it was even worse, you know.
That
so
you hadn't exaggerated it, in
no,
fact you toned it down.
Yeah, and that, you know, changed the whole situation for me. And then we are in a very difficult landscape here, fiction, recollection, memory, everything is kind of frail and difficult to pin out. And that's what I'm looking for, you know. I'm looking for the complexity of things. And I think memory is, I opened a third book about a reflection of memory as untrustable. You can't trust memory, I mean. And the whole book is written out of memories. Of course, it isn't the truth, you know, in an objective way. And I'm interested in the way I remember it more than the way it actually happened. So people have also, you know, written letters to me and said it didn't happen that way, or you have to change it. But I wouldn't change it, because it's, the whole idea is,
well, for example, very little things, very mundane things, like you remember a particular incident when your mother's peeling potatoes. Was she really peeling potatoes that night? I mean, how do you... this idea of the unreliable narrator, which is very common in fiction, it comes to the fore. But I wonder what you make of being compared to Proust, because I imagine that, on the one hand, it's a huge accolade, and one can be flattered by it, but also an enormous burden too.
When I first heard it, I thought this is a contradiction in terms, a Norwegian Proust. I mean, that's impossible. But for me, I'm a great admirer of Marcel Proust. I read his books when I was 25, and 2 years later, I managed to write my first novel. And I didn't see, that these things have something to do with each other. But I kind of took his literary language, swallowed it, and just wrote a novel without knowing it. So my first novel is really indebted to Proust. But this, for me, was the anti-Proust project, because he's so sophisticated, and I mean, everything is brilliant and well composed, and I think it's the best novel ever written. And I did kind of the opposite. I just write in a rush. I don't care about details. It's only about the essence and getting somewhere else, and just everything is a kind of a storm of words.
And no revision? You don't go back?
No, I haven't. So it's very unsophisticated. And I thought, in the end of this project, I felt sorrow, because why didn't I slow down, try to make it better, and try to make a really good novel? Because now it's blown, I can't do it again, This is it. But
you sustained that thought of the rush of words and wanting to tell the story over a period of 3,600 pages.
Yeah.
That's a long time to sustain, this has to just come out, rather than thinking,
no,
as a writer, because you were a writer before that, you were a novelist.
Yeah.
So why resist the temptation to revise?
It is a method, It's a method to get to somewhere you normally don't get to, So speed is the key for me. I have to write faster than my thoughts, No thinking. You can't think when you're writing. I can't think when I'm writing. No concepts. But the irony of this is the third and the fourth book I did very quickly, and I thought I wasn't free at all, because I used kind of the forms from existing forms. I mean, the childhood memoir and so on. So it's impossible to break free of everything. But that is the method, to write quickly. And it's an example. First 20 pages of the book, I used 8 weeks on them, I think 2 months. Tried to write it really, really, really good. And it is good. It's the only part in the book I could say, this is good writing. And then the fifth book, which
Your marketing people must just think you're a nightmare.
And then the fifth book is 500 pages, and I used the same amount of time, 8 weeks, So it's kind of speeding up, speeding up, speeding up, speeding up, and you're into something, and it's all subconscious. I had a problem 2 o'clock, in the afternoon. Didn't know what to do. Stopped writing. Slept. Start writing. It's all, it's all done.
Yeah.
It's don't have to think about it. It makes itself in a way.
In the first volume, you say, or Karl Ove says, I wanted so much to be someone, to be special. You are undoubtedly someone, and you are someone beyond Norway now. I wonder whether you feel, great, this person who said that, aged, you were in your 20s, I think, when you were a teenager, an adolescent, you were saying, I wanted so much to be someone, to be successful. Now you are. What does that fulfillment mean to you, if anything?
It's complicated, I think. Most of all, why does a teenager want to be something special? Why someone want to be, a rock star or a famous person? That's because he is no one for himself, He's kind of, and I've always been full of self-hatred, self-loathing, and it's very unbalanced, I think. And no matter how many compliments I got, no matter how many people said this is really good, doesn't help anything. It's like, I want to be loved, and it's not enough just to be loved by my family. I just want to be loved by everybody. But I realize this is like a disease, and I think it's many people in this business have this disease, and I've written about it, and I think it's it's the way out of this is writing, because there's the place to hide. There's the place where you are no one, you know. You are without a self. And that's the good thing with writing and reading for me, and that's why I'm in it. But I have, you know, I'm in pain when someone said this is very good, because I can't live up to it. I don't think it's good myself, and so on and so on. But I still appreciate it. Say more, you know?
I want to talk about the controversy surrounding the title, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, in a moment. But I want to talk first about the struggle itself in the books. Because what it feels to me to be is two pretty fierce battles, one with your father, and the other struggle is with death itself. The first part of Volume 1 is this rumination on death, which is redolent of Walter Benjamin, and you talk a lot about absorbing the culture around you, and then it's informing how you write and what you write. I wonder if you can explain a little bit about why you felt it important to start the book with talking about death, because it's such an extraordinary piece of writing about our contemporary society's relationship with death and how difficult it is for us to feel at ease with the materiality of death.
Yeah. It's a lot of things. I didn't think of no one of them. I just wrote it, but I think I could see it afterwards. First of all, I wanted to start in the general, you know, and go to the specific. So I started with death, and then my father's death. But also, I was fascinating or interested in the phenomenon that this happens all the time around us. I mean, all the time around us this happens, but we can't see it. It is hidden for us, you know, and it's such an existential premise for us, but it's hidden. Why is it hidden? And we don't talk much about it, and we have very difficulties by, you know, grasping it. And I think this book is about what we know and don't talk about. So I want to start there in this visualization of that. What happens if we don't hide death? What happens if we could see death everywhere? And that's a perfect visual start of a novel, I think, who deals with these subjects. Because there's a lot of other things we don't talk about, but everybody knows, you know. And we have in common, but there is certain no communication about it other than in art and in literature.
Why did you choose to call it Mein Kampf? Because that immediately is a provocation.
Yeah.
Not least in Western society, everywhere.
Yeah.
People are going to say, why has he chosen to call a novel or a memoir Mein Kampf? Why would you do that? Was it a provocation?
Yes, partly a provocation. But I have to say how it came to be, because first the novel was, my working title was Argentina, which is a very bad title, doesn't reveal anything. But it has to do with, you know, all my longings I've always, which the place I don't live in but long to, you know, that's Argentina. And then I was talked with a friend of mine, and we were discussing Adolf Hitler and his Mein Kampf. And I mentioned Mein Kampf, and he said, there's your title. And I realized, yes, you're right, there's my title. And I called my editor, and he said, no, we can't do that. But he called back a few weeks later and said, it's okay. But for me, this title, it is a provocation. It's a way of saying, I don't care about you at all. I'm doing whatever I like. That's one aspect. But there's another aspect that's more important, and that's, you know, have you read Mein Kampf? By Adolf Hitler?
No.
No, because I have, and it's amazing to see that it's, you know, it isn't all the things that has to do with humanity, all the things that has to do with to fail. I mean, blushing doesn't exist in that book. You know, it's kind of something completely different. And my book is all about everyday life, banality, falling over, being a fool, being stupid. It's in the book. It's an anti-perfect book, you know. It's about anti-perfection, anti-ideology book. And I did just want that to be present in the title. And there is a lot of longing in the book, and it's a longing towards the perfect, you know, the perfect world, the perfect piece of art, being the perfect man. And I know that's impossible to gain and impossible to have. So that's in the title for me.
But in the journey of trying to be not the best perhaps, but a good, decent person, you expose a huge amount of humiliation for yourself.
Yeah.
You open yourself to incredible shame
Yeah.
in a way that I think would surprise even the most open person, even anybody who would say, oh, well, I don't mind what people think about me. You know, I'm this, I'm that, accept me as I am. Where does that impulse to expose yourself to feeling, not worrying about showing how humiliating situations that you've been in are?
Yeah, that was very difficult. It's like the threshold, you know. You won't cross it because it's very hard. My whole life is about what do other people think of me, and I'm very, very much, you know, maneuvering around because I have no self-confidence, and it's very important for me what other people think, and I had to get rid of that in the book. It was very hard, but it was possible just because I wrote without, you know, someone looking. I could do it. I was all by myself. Then in the book 4, that hasn't come in English yet, there is the most embarrassing episode in my whole life, and I never told anyone about it. And it has to do with sexual shortcomings, you know, which is the most embarrassing thing. And I came to that point. I had, okay, no, I have to deal with this, and I did. I wrote it down, and I called my friend and read it out loud to him, and he was just laughing, you know. and then I put it in the book. I know it's 500,000 Norwegian that knows of my sexual shortcomings, but I can't think that thought, and I don't think, you know, I have not present in my mind that people knows all these things. For me, this is literature, and it's, you know, connected to my study, and that's it.
And yet, you say that you can't connect it to yourself, that all these people, and us, when the book comes out in English, we will have the opportunity to read volume 4, and yet you don't live in Norway anymore. You live in Sweden. So tell me about the connection between this attempt in the project, in the endeavour, to distance yourself from it being your life story, to the real impact on your life.
Yeah. I lived in Sweden when I wrote about Norway, and that distance was, you know, absolutely necessary to do it. And then I was publishing the first book, writing the third, which all the books should be published in 1 year. So I had to write 4 novels that year, I mean, while it was publishing. And that was, you know, one of the things that was challenging but made it possible. And when this thing explodes in the media, I couldn't deal with it, so I just shut everything down. I said to all my friends, don't mention it. I didn't see TV, didn't read newspapers, and tried to shut it completely off, which is, of course, impossible, but
You tried?
I tried, yes. And then we moved on the countryside, and nobody is interested in literature around us. And I don't think even they know that I have written these novels.
Really?
So in my daily life, I'm, you know, kind of...
An anonymous figure?
Yeah, as far as it goes in a little village, yes, I am. And there was a documentary about me, and it was shown in Swedish TV, and they were so pleased because it was a picture from the village and so on, and that's basically how it is. But I don't read reviews, I don't read interviews, I don't try to avoid everything because it's so infected for me, and I can't deal with it. So I try just to pretend as it's not there.
How does that work? How do you pretend?
It is. I mean, I have a capacity for forgetting. I didn't know about that, but I have. I think it's...
It's interesting, a capacity for forgetting and also for remembering minutiae to the point of banality, which is what you yourself describe all 6 volumes as being.
Yeah, I think they are related in a way. I think because when I, for instance, I wrote book 3 rather quickly, and I have never read it again. And I was interviewed by Irish radio the other day, and she asked me about this episode, and I couldn't remember it being in the book, you know. So I didn't know what she was talking about. I could remember it from real life, but not in the book.
Wow.
And I think that has to do with the process. You know, you are, it's just you are in there, and you have no kind of connections to yourself. Really, it's the opposite of building an identity. It's kind of make it the opposite, I think.
So much of what you say and how you say it strikes me that you are as much a philosopher as you are a novelist. I wonder whether you read philosophy.
I read philosophy, and for me, that's a place to rest for me. I could read Heidegger, and you know, if you read him, it's extremely complicated, and you can't really. I think I understand 10% of it, but it feels like a very good place to rest. And it's the same if I read about physics. I don't understand, you know, the maths or anything involved, but it's just a good place to be. And yeah, Heidegger is important for me as a philosopher, but I can't say I understand. I understand maybe 10% of what he's doing.
Let's talk about the controversy of calling it Mein Kampf, because in the 6th volume, which I have not read because it's not been translated into English and my Norwegian is limited, you talk a lot about Hitler in that 6th volume. And you also talk about Breivik, the man who killed so many people in Utøya.
Yeah.
One of, in fact, I think the worst tragedy and atrocity in Norway since the Second World War.
Yeah, that's right.
I wonder if you can explain what propelled you to finally confront, even though Adolf Hitler was present, as you say, in the other volumes. What was it that propelled you to confront it directly and make the connection with Breivik?
Yeah. The thought was that the 6th book should be about the consequences of the other books. The moral consequences, the practicality consequences, and also the title. And you had to write a little bit about Adolf Hitler's book. So I couldn't buy it because I've become well known at the moment. So I had a friend to buy it for me, and I was going to Iceland, try to read it there because I was writing, realizing on the plane, trying to take up the book, that you can't read this book here on the plane. Is it possible to see someone reading Mein Kampf on a plane? And I realized this book is unique. This book is kind of evil, but it's still literature, so that makes it very interesting. What's in it? How is it to read it? Start to read it, start to write about it, and start to read about Hitler's life, expanded into, I think it's 400 pages about his life until he writes Mein Kampf, which is very, very interesting because until that point he hasn't done nothing, you know. All the biographies about Hitler starts with him being evil, bad, you know, but he probably wasn't. I mean, probably was like me and you. He hasn't done anything wrong at all. And his thoughts, they were common, you know. And that interests me very much too. So I wrote this thing about him in Vienna in the First World War, and try to describe his surroundings and his parents, and it was very interesting. And the first part of the book, that wasn't about me, you know. And then these things happened at Utøya, which when I was writing, and I thought I have to write about this. It was like I have the tools to grasp it because of writing about Hitler and his psychology, you know. And
was there enough distance as well? Were you in Sweden when Utøya happened?
Yeah, but I was like everybody, you know, I was crying all the time. It came so close. It was like, you know, when you see news, it's all about distance, but this wasn't distance for us. It was all there. So I was crying for 3 days, I think, and I was writing as well, crying and writing, and you know, Breivik is easily to identify for us. It's the same almost generation, same social strata, and the people he killed is, you know, we know who they are, and it's and it is really something we have to come to terms with. How is that possible? I mean, this, how could this happen? And I wrote rather briefly about it in the book, but then I've written several essays about it afterwards because it's so important, such an important issue, because it's such a, it's not a failure of society, but it is something wrong that makes this thing possible. And I think we have to identify it and discuss it and talk about it.
In terms of social politics, the politics with a small p in that context, the Norwegian government reacted to that incident in a way that probably no other government reacted in the same way when they were faced with similar terrorist attacks, atrocities. There was a real sense of deciding that the society was going to remain open as opposed to becoming more insular and closed. How do you explain that? Where does that impulse come from in the kind of collective psyche of Norway?
That's difficult for me to say, you know, because but I think it's a very small society, and it's like, you know, always someone that knows someone that's in the government, I have to say, almost like that. And I think it's also this social democracy thing. It's a very, equality is very strong. It's us, it's a very strong feeling of that. And I think we're kind of isolated as well. And I think but I have said so many negative things about the government, but I think they proved something they lived up to something. And I thought that was, you know, that was just brilliant. And we needed that, you know, we really needed that. And that was a good thing.
Let me just bring it back to you personally before we open it up to the audience, because I want to ask you about, you have 4 children.
Yeah.
And so you are a fully fledged father, completely engaged in their lives. It's clear from the books that you've written that one of your struggles was to be a father and present and do the prosaic things of changing nappies and taking them out in the stroller and so on. I wonder what relationship you would want them to have to the books that you've written.
I think from my own life, from my own experience, that I first started to understand my parents when I was around 40. Then I could understand why they did what they do, you know, and so I think they could be, you know, protesting against it, be angry against it, and that's a natural thing, because it is like I've been stealing something from them. And I could see it as that, and probably will, me taking away something. But I hope that the perspective of that I gave something to them as well could be, you know, present when they are 40. But then I'm an old father, so I'll probably be dead. But but I don't know. It's impossible to say. But
but it's something you think about.
Yeah, of course. Almost all the time. I mean, almost all the time I'm thinking of that.
I have so many more questions, but I'm going to open it up to the floor. I wonder if we can turn those lights down so I can see hands going up. There's one in the front here straight away. Can we get a microphone?
Thank you. I've read the first 2 volumes, and I admire enormously your capacity to speak about things that are not spoken about, as you've said. I'm very interested to hear that in the last volume you've written about Hitler and about Anders Breivik, because it seems to me that even stronger than the taboo and talking about death, we have a taboo that we find it difficult to admit that we can empathise with the perpetrators of evil. And I personally think it's really important that we begin to do that. Because as long as we don't empathise with the perpetrators of evil, evil continues to be committed by people who feel misunderstood and alienated. And I just wondered if you could say something about what you learnt in those writings. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, very much so, because I think the danger of it was exactly that there were normal people who did it. I mean, normal, that it is possible for a whole society to do such crimes, that there is a certain dynamic in there, you know, and starting out wanting to do good. I'm sure when Adolf Hitler started out as a politician, he wants to do good, you know. And what interested me was that it in fact was, yeah, I can't, but identifying with him and try to find out who he was. He's, you know, the whole strata of politics and everything just crumbled. It just disappeared, and it was obviously a lie, you know, but a very good lie. You want to do these things. I mean, and in Nazi Germany there were so many good feelings. One of the best books I've read about that was Klemperer. That was a German Jewish philologist who was there, you know, and he was all the time trying to adapt, you know. I'm sure this is good, and I'm sure this was going to be good, and more, and didn't understand what happened because it happened so slowly, and it happened in the language, you know, more and more brutality, but first of all in the language. And then in the end, the consequence was that nobody really, you know, bothered, nobody cared. They had made a transition from we to them and to it. And the amazing thing about reading Hitler is that there is no you there. It's I, and it's we, and it's them. But all the, you know, the humanity is in the you. I mean, that's the other, and it's completely not there in Mein Kampf.
There's a hand going up there, and then the lady in the front, just here.
Firstly, thank you for writing what, from my experience, is the greatest work of literature, certainly in my reading lifetime. It's a privilege to be here.
He's not connecting with that in any way.
No, I know. And I hope it goes out on live stream as well. But I'm interested in what you say about the structure, in the sense that when you're writing, there almost isn't one from what you've described.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that work? Because it's very, very musical, the way you dip in and out of time, and clearly you've had to extend that, well, not had to, but you've extended that over 6 works. So do you hold stuff back consciously and say, well, that's for volume 4? I mean, how does that structure work?
In the first 2 books, it's all kind of completely free, because then I thought it would only be those 2 books. So there is a lot of change by, you know, different ages and so on. But then I decide I have to go chronologically from there on. But music is a very good comparison here, because musicians, they don't think, you know, they just play. And it's like that to write. The best thing by writing is if you can manage to do that. I mean, like music, no thinking. And I'm almost very envy of painters, musicians, because they don't have to go through your head. They can go directly to your heart, you know. You can't do that as a novelist, but you can make the way shorter in a way.
The lady in the front. Do you have a microphone? It's coming.
I just wanted to say that the reason that I related you to Proust is because I'm a writer as well, and when I read a sentence by Proust, I think if I could have written that sentence, I would die a happy woman. And I had exactly the same reaction to yours work. There's some of the sentences that you write, I know that if I had written them, I could drop dead that second, and it would be actually fine. And I also want to say, I think that there's a relationship between Adolf Hitler and Sylvia Plath in Daddy, You Bastard, We're Through, Daddy, You Nazi, We're Through, and your relationship with Hitler maybe and Mein Kampf, because both my parents committed suicide, and I've always had that some kind of a link with something that's profoundly evil. And I know that Sylvia Plath did, because we've confronted something that, you know, we've got to empathise with somehow to get to live our lives, but yet it's impossible to empathise with it. So it's a kind of, and I think in that comes out very well in your, this struggle, which you call it, it comes out, and it is our struggle, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so compelled. You know, I'm compelled. It's an addiction. I read you in the morning. I read you in the afternoon. I read you when I go to bed. You know, because I can sense that struggle.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so potent. Anyway,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's a hand just up here in the front.
Thank you.
And one here.
You said that when your family read it, all hell broke loose. I wasn't quite clear about how that was resolved. Who objected the most, and how was it resolved?
That was my father's family who publicly wrote a letter and signed it and said, basically, this isn't true or this shouldn't be published. And there was also threats about, you know, court and lawsuit. That never happened. But the result was that my publishing house hired lawyers who read all I wrote, you know, during this process. And they just didn't read it. They had kind of statement about it, like, you know, I'm used to literary criticism, but it was another kind of criticism. It was very interesting. It really was very interesting. And I was also into it because Åsne Seierstad, Norwegian journalist, was that time in a court case. Most of the same reasons. So I read the documents from there, and I was into this for a long time. And it has to do with what can you say, what can't you say, you know. And it's very, in the court system, they're very good, I think, very practical and good readers, those lawyers, at least
Just
mine were.
On an emotional level, what about your brother and your mother, for example?
My brother sent me an email when I read it, and he, you know, and the title of the email was "Your Fucking Struggle," and I thought, this is not going to go well. But then his next line was, "I'm just joking," and he said, "You can do it. I don't, you know, I'm not pleased with it, but you can do it." And in the book, I said something like that: when we meet, me and my brother, our eyes never meet, and we don't shake hands. And the next time I saw him, you know, he looked me in the eye, shook hands, and that was very touching for me because it's, you know, so that was a good thing. My mother, she has been so angry with me for several reasons, and when I was writing the fourth book, she called me, "You have to stop now, please, please, you have to stop now. Think of your children," because then the attention was, I mean, incredible. And there's a lot of that kind of reactions from all the people involved, and I think nobody really liked it, because if you write about someone, they want it to be like 20 pages, 40 pages, 50 pages, but if you write just, you know, a sentence of him, why am I not important, you know, what's this? And there's another thing, that's what's been standing, because these people are not writing novels. So that's it, you know, that sentence. I remember writing about one in my class. I just described her laugh, you know, like she laughed like a horse or something. And that's it about her. I mean, that's an insult.
Lady in the front.
I wonder if you talk some more about the operation of memory in your work, because one of the things that's so fascinating is that you raise all the questions about truth and do we remember, or once we remember, are we remembering the story of the memory?
Yeah.
And all those things about, you know, is it fiction, is it truth?
Yeah.
And you've talked today about, you said, you know, that you just write, but you actually give the impression of a kind of impossible total recall.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you researched anything, or if you asked other people, or how that all operated. And could you also tell us when the next volume's coming out in English? Because it's very hard to wait.
Okay. I think in this book, I think of identity in much the same way as memory. Identity, you could say who you are in just a few sentences, right? I want to kind of try to go beyond that and look for the complexity. And it's the same thing with memory. I maybe have 10 memories from my childhood which I really remember, like iconic, you know. But it's impossible to write about them because they are so dead. It's just images. But when I start to write I write very visually. I can see the rooms, and I just start to write about the room or the landscape or something like that, and things keep coming back. And I can, you know, if you did something when we were young, played football when we were young, and then don't play it for 20 years, and then start to play it again, all kinds of things comes back to you, you know? Not just the football thing, but the whole world that surrounds it. And I think my thought is that we have everything inside us, and it's just a matter to get there. So I brought the same thing when I was 16, you know. I'm still 16 somewhere, I'm still 7 somewhere, I'm still 30. And it's also has to do with the writing process in itself. I invent a lot of things, of details, but the details are correct, but the moment they occur is not correct, you know. But it's about writing, trying to make it look like or feel like it was, you know, and that's it.
We have sadly run out of time, but I hope that you will all join me to thank Karl Ove Knausgård. Hugely stimulating.
Thank you very much.